Hello and welcome back to the Your Story, Our Fight podcast. We have a great show today. I am very, very excited to introduce you to an old friend of mine who has been a part of Lupus LA for a very long time and has a really incredible story that I think you're going to love. So please welcome to the show Amanda Palley, who is Senior Vice President of Current Programming at CBS. She's a graduate of Yale. She's a mother of two, a wife, and I happen to know her parents are fantastic. So I know she's a great daughter to them as well. So hi, Amanda, welcome.
Hi, I'm glad the money my parents sent you to put that plug in got to you.
Absolutely, of course. Well, your father is a master promoter, so it wouldn't be fair not to give them a shout out, right?
It's true.
So tell me, you have such a really interesting story. I want you to tell just give me that sort of basics of, when you were diagnosed and when the screeching car came to a screeching halt and you had to realize, hey, something's wrong.
So all throughout, my memory is that I was having symptoms in college but lupus is so tough to diagnose because my symptoms were like, I'm really tired, which
Right.
I'm a college student. And there was a summer where I had joint pain and stuff like that and had gone to a couple of doctors and they basically were like, oh, you just have mono, even though when we tested you for mono, it came out negative. It's still just mono. Cause I think in the early 2000s, that was just, they either told college girls, you have mono or you have an eating disorder. And those were the only options.
Which wasn't always far from the case in a lot. Right?
Oh yeah, no, just like there are, other options there too. And they're like, you have mono and an eating disorder, but also something else.
Right.
But so I graduated college, moved out to LA, was working as an assistant at CAA and started noticing that if I got a paper cut, it was really hard to get it to stop bleeding. And I was having nosebleeds and stuff that I sort of hadn't had since I was a little kid, but I also had nosebleeds when I was a little kid. So I was like, okay, well, this is embarrassing, but this is a thing that happened to me in the past. It kind of slowly got worse and worse. But I was just like, well, I am 23 and I am very busy and I don't have time to go to the doctor. I can't possibly take time off work for, an hour-long doctor's appointment. Right. The things you think when you're young and also working in, an agency culture as an assistant where, any weakness, any, falling down on the job just means there's someone else who wants to take your spot. And so I was just really terrified to take time off to go to the doctor. I also really didn't think that there was anything seriously wrong. Finally, my old boss, I had gotten promoted and was working for one of the partners at the agency. And my first boss basically just started trolling me and saying, Amanda, you look terrible. And I'm like, you're just jealous. You miss me. I don't work for you anymore. You're just being mean. But it kind of got in my head. I think the trigger of all of this was that in March of 2003, I had run the LA Marathon, and it was the year that it was like 98 degrees in March and sort of unexpectedly hot. And looking back, I can trace sort of my deterioration, I think from a combination of just working all the time, being in my early 20s and, probably not taking great care of myself, eating, the ramen and lean cuisine,
right. Sure. And training for a marathon.
And then running it in really, really tough conditions, that I think were tough for professional athletes, let alone just like random kind of And so in any case, by September, my old boss had really been trolling me. And finally I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll go see his doctor. So I went to the doctor. And the doctor was like, oh, you're probably just anemic. We'll take some blood. We'll figure it out. And I was like, okay. So the next day, the doctor's office calls me in my office. And I was like, my cell phone was in like the back office. I was sitting in my boss's office. I'm like, why is the doctor calling me? What is happening? And they were like, oh, we think that there's been a mistake because your blood levels are really weird. And like, generally when we see someone like with this few platelets, like they're dead. So we're pretty sure it's
in the middle of your workday.
So we're pretty sure it's a mistake, but like, could you please, you can't come here, but can you go, we'll send you to another office to just get your blood drawn again, just to make sure that it's just like a weird error. And I'm like, okay. So I hang up and my boss is like, what's wrong? And I was like, explain what happened. And he turns to my co-assistant, Darren, and is like, Darren will take you. And I'm just like, but who will answer your phone? So
that's why you were a rock star assistant, because that was your first thought.
I couldn't comprehend of a day with my boss not having us there to answer his phone and do his schedule and all of these things. Meanwhile, my boss was an incredibly smart, talented, capable man who'd risen up to be a partner at an agency. Like, he probably could fend for himself for a day, but I was just like, and so we go to get the blood draw again. They do it and they're like, oh yeah, it's weird that you're not dead. We're gonna send you to the hospital. You need an immediate platelet transfusion. I was like,
really?
Like, and so we leave the doctor's office and I get in my friend Darren's car and I burst into tears and he's like, oh my God, it's gonna be okay. And I was like, no. We cannot go to the hospital. I don't have anything to read. So Darren brings me home to my apartment and he's like, I swear to you, if you die in between like here in your apartment, I am going to look like the worst person ever. And so he drops me in my apartment. I packed a bag of like a bunch of scripts and like pajamas. And I'm like, okay, now we can go to the hospital. So
that's crazy.
We get to the hospital. I remember I had like a work drink scheduled. I remember on my BlackBerry emailing my friend who's actually now a showrunner and a dad at my preschool, which is hilarious. So Joe Henderson, who I've known for 9,000 years, part of this story, which is crazy. And email him saying like, oh, I'm not feeling great. Like, let's reschedule. And he's like, okay, sure. Meanwhile, I'm sitting
having
like
no idea.
The waiting room at Cedars. So I get checked in and I haven't, because I tried to call my parents, but they were out. They were at some event. And it was like before we had like cell phones, but it wasn't like a time when
texting,
everyone texted. It was 2004, I guess it was 2004. And so I was just like, okay, well, I'll tell them when I tell them. So I get checked in and they basically, you're supposed to have between, I think 150,000 and 300,000 platelets. And I had 500 and they were literally like, if you had waited one more day, like you would be dead. And
really? And how, at this point, are you feeling the symptoms that sort of define your lupus at that point? Are you feeling the joint pain and the tired, achy, or not really?
Maybe. It's so funny because I was just so like focused on working and I don't know. It's, you're sort of, when you're 23, you think that you are invincible and it doesn't, it just never occurred to me that something like really could be wrong. Mm-hmm. Because it just felt like all the.
So at what point then did it switch to this autoimmune conversation?
Well, it took a long time. So in the hospital, they thought that I had, they were like, maybe you have leukemia, maybe you have like, they thought there's some like blood disease. They thought that maybe I had, they were only looking at my blood numbers. And so so no one even brought up lupus. And it wasn't until I was in the hospital for like, I don't know, like 4 or 5 days. And they were sort of like, well, we've done all the tests. Like, we'll send you to this, blood disease specialist and maybe she can figure it out. But in the meantime, the original doctor I'd seen was like, I want you to go see my friend, Dr. Wallace, because I think this might be autoimmune.
All roads lead to Dr. Wallace.
And like, literally it was, thank goodness, because the minute walked into his office, he was like, oh, yeah, no, you have lupus. Like, just like, duh. And,
Right.
and it was so interesting because I think at the hospital, they were only looking at my blood work and not kind of putting all the pieces together. Whereas when he was looking at the full picture, he's like, okay, well, like, when he asked me, have you been exhausted? Have you? And I was like, yeah, but I work very hard and I ran the marathon. He's like, oh, you ran the marathon. Like he was sort of putting it all together in this way that I was like, oh, so yeah. So they put me on prednisone, and that really helped, like, fairly quickly. And that was the beginning of my journey.
So tell me, as you're in this incredibly high-powered job in an industry that you are really at the beginning of wanting to tackle, and as you look back on it now, what did that do to your approach, sort of your life mission, your sort of, how did you have to make an adjustment?
It's a great question. I'm very much like, we all live our life sort of in the kind of, you're playing the hand you're dealt, right? And so then I get dealt this new card that's like, okay, well, now I'm going to have to take medication. I'm going to have to go to these doctors. I'm going, and I was just like, okay. I think, and again, I feel, I should say up front, like, I have had a much, much easier go of it than so many lupus patients. I've been so fortunate to essentially, I've had a couple flares, but since that first really bad, scary, go to the hospital, et cetera, I have not had anything near that bad. I have been really, really fortunate that with medication and with, staying current with doctor's appointments and trying to stay like, fit and healthy, I have been just very fortunate that my disease has not gotten as bad as some people. And I know, look, I would say that is, probably 1% due to me like drinking a lot of water, but 99% just due to good luck. I think that I am really just have been very fortunate that my disease has been manageable and dealable. Whereas I know a lot of people, I'm in awe of, was saying, I watched Marissa's interview with you, which is such a great interview, and just the hurdles that she has had to get over, but yet still been like super successful showrunner and mom, and you're just like, I've been
everybody's journey is very unique, and I think that's one of the interesting parts about lupus in general is, everybody has a different story to tell, but there's I think when you're first diagnosed in your 20s, that has to send kind of a shockwave through you. And I think people react, almost in one of two ways, sort of the, okay, shut down, this is terrible, what am I going to do? Or, which I'm assuming is your approach, is sort of a, okay, we got to just do what we're told and from the doctors and push forward.
I have a lot of anxiety about things that are out of my control, about worrying about, well, what if this happens, and I'm working on that. But
me too.
When something actually happens, then you just deal with it. And sometimes when I'm worrying about, well, what if X happens, I think about, okay, well, what if that happened? What would I do? Because I think with lupus, it's like, because people, I remember I had a very old friend who is very anxious about getting sick and being sick. And I remember when I was diagnosed with lupus, she was like, it really made me feel better, because it was like, well, what would happen if I got diagnosed with a chronic disease? And she's like, well, it happened to Mandy and she seems fine. And I'm like, thanks. Like,
right.
I could help you out. but I do think when something actually happens, then you deal with it. I think we could have all spent 2 years ago worrying, well, what if there were a pandemic and what would we do? And then we're all thrown into it. And you know what? You deal.
We do what we do. Right.
And
exactly.
It's tough and but you get through it. And I think it's the same thing for me with lupus. It's like, well, okay, this is a thing, but also, you know, I was in the hospital and they were like, maybe it's leukemia and maybe you'll have to do, you know, chemotherapy. And so again, I really feel very, very fortunate in that, like, yes, I have lupus, but it's been so much more manageable than so many other people. And I feel like I got off kind of easy, you know?
Well, we're going to dive deeper into that. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to hear a little bit more about what Lupus LA has been doing. And we'll be back right after this.
Lupus LA's fellowship program is an essential part of ensuring the training of future rheumatologists. The nation is experiencing a serious shortage of pediatric rheumatologists. Today, there are approximately 300,000 children diagnosed with rheumatic conditions in the United States, but only about 250 practicing pediatric rheumatologists to meet this tremendous need. Call 310-657-5667 or visit our website at lupusla.org to support the efforts of Lupus LA.
Welcome back to the Your Story, Our Fight podcast. I wanted to mention our sponsor, GSK, and thank them for their support. And welcome back, Amanda Palley, as we're learning more about her story. So you're in the hospital. They're trying to figure it out. What's your support system like? I mean, I know you have these amazing parents, but I'm assuming at the time they're on the East Coast.
Yeah.
And so, what does that look like? How long have you been in LA? What's your support system look like when you were first diagnosed?
I had been here less than a year. My parents they live in LA now, but they were still on the East Coast. And I had, you know, a couple really good friends who were great supports to me. My friend Christy, I remember texting her and telling her what happened. She was like, "What do you want?" And I was like, "Will you bring me a burrito?" and she went to like Baja Fresh or somewhere. Should they sponsor us?
I
went to
remember Baja Fresh. Right?
They brought me a burrito. It was delicious. and you know, my aforementioned fellow assistant Darren, who had, you know, driven me to the hospital, you know, came and visited, and you know, my boss and like the third assistant, whose name is Tao, were all just really supportive, and you know, sent me magazines and flowers, and people were super supportive. I think, like, I had worried that this was like an embarrassing failure, but you know, to everybody else, you know, someone's in the hospital, you're like, oh my goodness, that's terrible. Like, how can I support? Right. You know, my friend Kimmy, who was a bridesmaid at my wedding, I remember came and visited me. Like, there's just people who are still incredibly present and influential in my life, who were there when that went down, and I'm still.
And then once the diagnosis sets in, and once you're sort of, okay, you've done your internet homework and Dr. Wallace has told you kind of what the plan is, then do you still rely on that same group, or do your parents come more into play from what was that dynamic? Because I know
came out like short, like my dad came out first, and because I think my youngest sister was still in high school, so they couldn't like both come, but my dad came out, and then both my parents came, and you know, and I was on, you know, prednisone, and I was really like grouchy and just like bloated and just all the awful things when you're on steroids. But I remember he came, and I was like, I need to hang these pictures. Let's go hang these pictures. Like, I'm gonna take advantage of my dad being here.
Right.
And you know, they were really supportive, and you know, immediately wanted to get involved in Lupus LA and in, you know, helping lupus research. And as you know, they've been really, really active, you know, since the early days. Sure. And, you know, they love you, and they love everything that the organization has done and continues to do, and have been so happy to have that community, you know, for me and for them, as just like, hey, this is a need, you know, for more research, for more support, and we're gonna help fill it. Now it's very personal to them, obviously. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's
Do you think that sort of activism and it played a part in sort of your treatment and your, how you look at your illness, and does it give you sort of a little bit more feeling of control? Or
yeah, that's a really good question. Probably. I mean, look, I'm not shy. So I'm always gonna ask the questions. I'm gonna do the research. I'm gonna talk to the people. My mom always jokes that she wears a talk to me sign because just random strangers will just come up and start a conversation with her. But I think probably my sisters and I also like have that sign where, and for me, it's maybe even less random people talking to me and more me just being curious about other random people. and so I think I was always going to advocate for myself and for, what was going on with my health and all of that. And I mean, I think I also saw it, as someone who's been pregnant, who's had 2 babies. There's a lot of stuff in the medical world where you do really need to advocate for yourself, and you do need to say, but I have a question, and don't just rush me out of here. And what is so amazing about Dr. Wallace and his team is that I never feel rushed. I always feel like they're listening and they're taking me seriously and taking my health seriously. And I have a friend who actually just recommended, who has an autoimmune disease, and I just said, reach out to them, like tell them everything that's going on. They won't make you feel crazy. They will listen. They will because I think so many times, especially with women, it's sort of like, oh, I mean, it's back to, when I was in college, and they're like, oh, maybe you have an eating disorder.
Yeah. But I think that's, it's something that a lot of lupus patients really need to hear, because I think whoever their doctor is, having that relationship where you can bring up these, because lupus is full of weird, odd symptoms that pop in and pop out. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand who don't deal with it on a daily basis. So, I think advocating to yourself is a really big part of treatment.
And just saying, like, if you think something is wrong, something is probably wrong. And I was not paying really any attention to my health, but yet before I was diagnosed, when I think back about the times that I did go to the doctor because I had joint pain, I remember actually probably a year before I was diagnosed, when I was early in LA, I had a butterfly rash, and I went to a dermatologist, and she gave me some, topical cream, and it never even crossed her mind of this might be a piece of a larger disease. It was just oh, this is a 22-year-old girl with a rash. And looking back, and look, it doesn't mean if you have a rash that you have lupus. It's just,
I wonder if that dermatologist would miss that today. I'd hope not.
I also hope not. I think there's so much, it feels like in the, 16 years since I was diagnosed, it just feels like there's been a lot more people talking to each other, and there's a lot more kind of understanding that, again, I mean, I would hope that if I were in the hospital today with those symptoms, that they would say, okay, well, this might not just be a blood thing. This might be a larger body thing, and I don't know. I hope so.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, I hope so. I mean, that's one of the things we try to do is educate the world. And that's, one of the things we're doing right here, right now. So I want to go back to sort of when you made the leap out of the agency world into the network world, and how much, I guess I want to know how much lupus has played a part in sort of your decision-making about not only career, but about having kids, and about, how does it kind of play a role in all of those choices?
Again, it's, I don't know, I'm either, lucky or stupid or both, because I really haven't let it be a factor. I think, again, there's days when I'm really tired, but everybody's really tired, and I also, now for the past, so I've been at CBS for the past 7 years, and I will say there is no better place that I've ever worked. My department and sort of the larger company that I deal with have been so amazing. And I haven't had, knock on wood, I haven't had any major flares or issues that have caused me to be out for a minute. But I know that if I did, everyone would be super supportive and sympathetic and caring, and not like, well, you're out. I think people really care about the humans who work there, and my experience has just been so positive. And again, I feel fortunate that I haven't had to test that, but I know that their policies on medical leave and I've taken 2 maternity leaves there, and it's been great. And I've had so much FOMO, sitting out,
right.
sitting with my adorable children, being like,
right.
But it's really, people are understanding. And again, I think that if we were sitting here having this conversation, 15 years ago, I don't know if I would be telling the same story. I think a lot has changed for the better. It seems to me in workplaces overall. And again, my experience at CBS has always been very positive, but just anecdotally from other friends in the entertainment industry, it just seems like it's easier now than it was 10 years ago to be honest, to be vulnerable, and to say, I have this issue that I have to go take care of, and it's not a scarlet letter. It's not, it's part of what makes you human.
Yeah. No, and I'd like to think that that's true, and spreading to other corporations. And
well, I just think, you look at, especially everything that's gone on the past year and change, it's just, people are realizing now more than ever, and probably way too late, there's all sorts of ways to be a person. There's all sorts of types of people, and all of us are better for including as many different voices in the conversation, and for having compassion for different people and their different life experiences, and some of that is health and also disability. And I think the experience you're going to have with someone who has grappled with a chronic disease is different than the experience you're going to have with someone who is just like a, healthy, young 25-year-old kid. And I think both of those points of views and experiences are really valid and important. So I think
that's, I've never heard that. I think that's a really interesting perspective. I would say to people who are lupus patients, especially young lupus patients who are going out for those job interviews, to really lean into the experience they've had and make that a part of their an attribute. Really, I that's a really interesting point. I think.
Yeah, I think people, it's certainly, people have different levels of comfort with what they want to share, but I just, I think so many people are grappling with some sort of illness, or have a family member or a friend or someone who has, it's like, once you start talking about it, the floodgates open, and someone says, oh, I have Hashimoto's, and and suddenly realize that this is so much more common than you would think, based on, what people talk about in sort of, mainstream society. And, I really, I feel like now, I'm always happy to talk about it and to share my own personal experience, which is just my own and not representative of like any larger group of lupus patients. But I think there is that sort of connection and compassion from someone who, again, is just willing to be honest and say, like, yeah, no, this is my like kind of weird patchwork story.
Yeah, no, I wrote my college essay about how I used humor to, battle my lupus, essentially, because I was 16 when I was diagnosed. And one of the women who worked in admissions called me and said her mother had lupus. And, so I hang up the phone, and I got into college because, I had to happen to have the admission counselor whose mother had lupus, and my story resonated with her. And, and I, obviously I've been an advocate for a long time, really since then or before, but you do find a lot of people who hide their illness, and once they have that breakthrough and come out and talk about it, whether it's in a support group or on a podcast or, just to their friends, I think that can be really freeing and a big positive influence in their care.
I'm just, look, again, I feel like if nothing else is clear from this interview, I am a talker and probably an oversharer to, I love information, and I think having more information only helps you make better decisions. And to find those levels of connection with someone where you say, I'm gonna go out on a limb and I'm gonna tell you this thing, it generally encourages the other person to do the same. And then you've shared something personal. And again, it doesn't mean walk around town, tell everybody all your secrets, but
Right.
But I do think I've honestly never said to someone I have lupus and have them been like, well, then you're lame.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's true. I would think that's true.
It's probably different being diagnosed as a teenager. I can see as a teenager making it feeling, somehow like, well, you're less than somehow. And I hope you didn't. And I hope that any teenagers now who are diagnosed don't, because it's not. It's like, oh, you have lupus and also you're being a teenager. That's like double hard.
Mm-hmm. I think it's very tough now. I mean, I think when I was diagnosed, there was no internet. And nobody really knew what lupus, unless you knew somebody with it, you didn't know what the word meant. So I sort of had that same approach you had, which was, all right, I have it. Let's go. Give me the medicine. Off we go. But I would think now today it's very challenging in this internet, social media world, to sort of go through that. But I honestly think hearing your story is really important for people who are getting diagnosed, because I think that's helpful. And tell me about motherhood and lupus and sort of,
I was
how
like,
that.
Dr. Wallace actually said that like pregnancy was good for me. Like I was doing great when I was pregnant, which I was mentally not doing great when I was pregnant. I am very glad I have my children. I really did not like being pregnant with it. I'm so glad I did it. I'm so glad they were born. It was rough. But physically, I was in good health. It felt sort of like my body's desire to grow the humans beat out my body's desire to eat itself. And so I was
putting it.
Yeah. I was very, very fortunate because I know multiple people with lupus who've had really tough pregnancies. And so I knew it was potentially a concern, but again, if you could put someone else's brain in my body, then I could have 5,000 babies, but I just had too much anxiety. It was I like things I can control. So baby out of me, I'm like, oh, you're crying, I can fix this. Baby inside me, I'm just worrying all the time.
Yeah. No, I've had that same level of fear. It's not even anxiety, it's just terror.
There's no control over it. I mean, you can, don't do drugs, don't smoke, don't drink,
that's about it.
But other than that, you just and now, I mean, you've seen it the same with your own kids. I look at my kids sometimes and I'm like, I made you. I made my body.
Yeah.
Now you have opinions.
Right. And I from what I understand, it gets worse, but
oh no,
that's what they tell me, but you're ahead of me, so it's okay. You can tell me.
It's very funny because the older they get and the more opinions they have, it's like, they're so funny. But also I see the teen years. We're still 4 and 2. We're a long way out. Yeah, I see them torturing me.
How much do they know about lupus and anything, or
they're too young?
Not really.
Yeah. They've never. It's certainly not a secret. I'm trying to think if they've ever seen me taking my Plaquenil or anything. I don't know if they have, because I take it in the morning. But I wouldn't keep it a secret from them. It just sort of hasn't come up, and I feel like it's sort of a like, I don't know.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
But
yeah, no, I hear you.
But it's certainly, I also wouldn't want it to be some weird, shameful secret, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
They get very curious. I mean, my daughter is also an autoimmune patient, so we've sort of now gone through it together, which is really interesting. And it's a long story, but yeah, it's
to talk, you know, to talk it through and say, like, this is what happens when you go to the doctor, when you know.
Yeah, no, she'll tell you all about it for sure. All right, let me end on what shows are we going to be watching on CBS this summer?
My gosh. Well,
tell me what do we have to look forward to?
I'll tell you the shows that I directly work on. I have 2 comedies on CBS, Young Sheldon and Bob Hart's Abishola, which are both just fantastic and delightful escapes. But also still deal with, you know, real world issues and emotions, and, you know, all in 22 short minutes. Right. And then I have a show called Blood and Treasure, which season 1 aired 2 summers ago, and then was sort of a, you know, probably would have been on this past summer, but pandemic, etc. So I'm hopeful. We don't have an air date for that yet, but it's really big, fun Indiana Jones kind of action adventure that I just adore. And then I have a whole bunch of shows on CW that are the perfect, let me tell you, if you are not feeling great and you are tired because you have lupus and you are lying in your bed and you want a good binge, I got you.
Okay. All right. That's good. All right. That's good. I think that's really good advice, because that's especially through this pandemic, it's everybody's discovering new content, and it's you realized, I think, during this last year, I mean, everybody loves TV and it's important, but you realize how vital, I think, having some of these shows and, you know, to talk about with your friends, maybe there's a way of connecting, and, you know, and I think that's true in the lupus world for sure. I mean, you need a respite.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I just to name a couple of my CW shows, Nancy Drew is season 2 is airing now, and that's a really, really fun binge. It's, you know, sort of dark and there's ghosts. It's not your mom's Nancy Drew. And then I've been working on the first season of the Walker reboot, which is, you know, pretty far away from the original Chuck Norris version. It's much more grounded and much more, you know, sort of a family soap that has just been really rewarding to work on. And you know, but all our CBS CW shows are fantastic, and I love them because I am still the, like, you know, 14-year-old who is watching Dawson's Creek and you know, crying. And
shout out to Kerr Smith, who hosted our gala in probably right around the time you were getting diagnosed.
My gosh.
I love good buddy of mine.
Jack, was that his name?
Yep, exactly.
Jack and Andy. Yep. I love Jack and Andy. Kerr Smith.
And Meredith Monroe is one of our Lupus LA ambassadors. So,
oh my gosh.
Absolutely. We were big in the Dawson's Creek era.
Bring me on to like a Dawson's Creek roundtable lupus, whatever. I'm here.
Absolutely. All right. You said it. All right. Thank you so
great.
You say that again?
Kerr Smith was just on Riverdale. He was great.
Yes, exactly. So I'll send him your regards for sure. But thank you so much for doing this, Amanda. This is really, really an enlightening and fun conversation, and I appreciate it for sure.
A lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me. This is really great.
On behalf of the entire team at Lupus LA, we thank you for joining the Your Story, Our Fight podcast. Please tune in, spread the word, and come back for more inspiring lupus stories. I'm your host, Adam Selkowitz, wishing you good health, and to always remember, your story is our fight.